Welcome back to the not-so-distant future Wargamers as we explore another heavy hitter in the Infinity Universe, Yu Jing. In my first video in the Infinity playlist, I gave some broad strokes as to how this cyberpunk future of mankind has evolved from our current timeline and really how we reached and struck out amongst the stars. And one of the major players that developed early on soon became a big number 2 within the human sphere, and that is Yu Jing, of course. And the story of that exponential growth in money and territory begins with the People's Republic of China in the early 21st century, so not far removed from us today. China had, at this point, a long history of being an industrial and agricultural powerhouse. Right? Manufacturing was essential to the heart of the country. But on the horizon, a new threat was emerging, making China a victim of its own success. The combination of communism and capitalism that had brought the country this far was beginning to erode the cultural identity of its people. Outside intellectual contagions became a real issue as the traditions of citizens melted away, right? And I'm thinking like Maoist Buddhist principles, just to name a few, like part of their cultural identity or history, even if it's not their current identity. The state, meaning literally the Communist Party in charge, recognized that to control or keep control over its citizens, they needed an ideal, right? Something to rally around, something to bind people together. And so China essentially rebranded. The communist parties at the top selected the most preferable dogmas and core beliefs from several, kind of like Pan-Asian traditions to form a new state cultural identity. An emperor was reestablished to act as a figurehead that people can bond with. It's like, cherry picking the best parts of different political systems and religions and, just kind of cultural worldviews to create one that is based on China's needs. On the more capitalistic side, business emissaries from China went to all the nearby countries, many of which it neighbors because it's so huge, and it really just made them an offer. Join us and let us rise together. And this really wasn't so much of an offer as it was like an arm twisting, because China dominated all trade and industry and commerce in that part of the globe, and it was more of a muscle flex than anything else. So several minor, states, countries, villages, everything around them, basically. I'm going to name the big ones, but they all capitulated. And so to name a few, we have North Korea, Mongolia, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Taiwan, Nepal, Bhutan. The party renamed this new conglomerate, right? Because now everyone's on the same page and we're all trying to rebuild a new identity. And they rebranded all of those things combined as Yu Jing, literally meaning Jade Capital. And in one fell swoop, Yu Jing became the premier powerhouse on Earth, later absorbing South Korea and Japan. And they were able to do this even though both the Japanese have a long cultural history of being very distinct, we'll say, from Chinese culture. And the way they were able to do this is simply saying, you weren't conquered by China. We're all Yu Jing. We're all together. And so this new identity allowed for some of those older, governmental differences and maybe prejudices to kind of be put to the side. And this event, if you remember, set off a chain of events that saw the birth of Pan-Oceania, the largest power in the current Infinity setting of the human sphere. Those early days of Pan-Oceania happened because other nearby countries that didn't want to get absorbed by Yu Jing bonded together. Ultimately, this made Yu Jing the first great powerhouse of Earth, which begs the question, why are they number 2 in the human sphere in the current Infinity setting? Well, the answer is actually very simple. They played it too safe. Once the world saw the economic devastation that the loss of the Ariadne and the Aurora caused, space travel was thought to be way too risky. And so it was kind of put to the wayside as Yu Jing worked to consolidate its power base around the globe. For the engineers of Pan-Oceania, however, big risk meant big reward, and their ambition saw them settle the first of many human colonies. And so there's this snapshot in history where Yu Jing is on top, but the minute mankind strikes out to new worlds, they lose that place because they were too risk-averse. The moment that first stable colony was developed, the human sphere expanded 100-fold, right? The human sphere being like just everything about humanity, our influence, our touch, it all just grew much bigger. This whole thing sent Yu Jing party leaders into a frenzy. A galaxy-spanning gold rush had just kicked off, and they refused to be left in the dust. The government drastically reallocated funds into their space programs, and were able to not discover just one, but two worlds spinning parallel together in a far-out system. This act divided their government into three fronts. There is the capital planet of Yu Jing, its twin planet Shentang, and the Far East regions of Earth, also known as Chengkuo. And to govern such a sprawling empire now, the Yu Jing evolved even further. The party, an evolution of the Communist Party of China, became a monolithic big brother. It was a political system that was very controlling and hard to get into, but even then, it's not like every communist is in total agreement about stuff. There are some within this party that still hold those conservative, more risk-averse values and rely on the wisdom of the past, just as there are young leaders who want to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Guiding all of them, as we said before, is the Dragon, a term they have for their emperor. And he keeps all these little micro-factions within the party working together, and he also acts as the face of the nation. And remember, nation has a big word when you're talking about multiple planets involved at this point. And he's kind of acted as this important rallying point for people as he delivers new laws and regulations. Now, unlike Hak-Islam with their silk trade, or Ariadne with their wealth of natural resources, or even, Pan-Oceania with its technology, Yu Jing doesn't have that one singular thing that sets it apart from other nations. Of course, in-game, there's a lot of unique qualities to the faction, but on a lore level, what makes them stand out, is that they became number 2 in the human sphere without a gimmick. Right? They just facilitate massive corporations. They govern an endless workforce. And they make very smart choices with their money. They understand the importance of culture within the state and have made the most of every aspect of its citizens' lives. And that is special, but they didn't have to strike gold or, innovate some ridiculous sci-fi technology. It was just hard work, political savagery, and smart investments that made them this absolute powerhouse. It's very stable. And that's a great transition into talking about why is Yu Jing so cool as a faction. And one of the things I'll say is that, it's mentioned multiple times in the lore when you're talking about Pan-Oceania. They're number 1. They have the best tech. And there's always this little shadow added to kind of their lore entries that but it's like a house of cards. They're expanding too quickly. They can't keep a good control over everything. And there are factions developing and that have different interests and stuff like that. Whereas Yu Jing is a very unified people, right? They are not in the first place of this race of mankind development and money and that kind of thing, but they are far more stable as a people. They have a unified identity. They work together in ways that Pan-Oceania does not. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, what we were talking about before with, they don't have a gimmick to getting rich and powerful. They're just a political and economic might. All this goes into the fact that this is probably the most plausible origin story, right? The fusion of, tradition and modernity, the ideas of crafting and ideology and a worldview to suit the needs of what direction mankind has been chosen to go in by businesses and political leaders. The idea of a modern nation just remaking itself is fascinating, and it's something, quite honestly, that in my real world life, I hope I get to see. In-game, these guys have some of the coolest models and all kinds of technology. They really do have kind of the market on melee stuff, which is not the greatest in Infinity, from what I understand. There's a new edition coming that might change that. But the fact of the matter is that they have all kinds of stuff that reinforce their traditional values and their aesthetics on a tabletop that really lends itself to being a faction that plays just like you would imagine it would based on their lore. And if you know me, that's something that it's super important to me. When I read about this faction and then I play it on a tabletop, the two feelings should match. And this is one where I think they really did a good job. I think they nailed it. So friends, if you are a Yu Jing player, tell me this, what's the best way to get into the faction? Like honestly, that's a good resource for folks who found this video interesting. What's a good way to get started? And frankly, just what do you like about them? Leave in the comments down below, I'd love to read them and interact with you there. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch and listen, and I'll catch you in my next lore video. Thank you all so much, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.